And good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I'm the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop. It is Tuesday, July 18th, just past 4:30 p.m. Thanks for tuning in today. I'll make a note now if you missed any portion of this conversation coming up, if you catch us halfway through, whatever it may be. If you listen to this and want to share it with anybody else who might find it relevant, you can find it all on whatsupnoop.com. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you all of our interviews, as well as we turn them all into podcasts so you can listen to them on the go. We have a lot of great conversations coming up. One that's become monthly is our chat with Newport Mayor Xay. And good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you?
Good. And I just want to say, emailed you yesterday, and you were eager to jump right on with us. I always like to point out that we don't have to twist arms with our elected officials, whether it's the school superintendent or you. You're always willing and able to join us to talk about what's happening in the city.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the job, right? Part of the job is being accessible at all times and being responsive and trying to get out, have as many community conversations as we can. And your outlet is a great way to do that.
And I wasn't going to start there, but I'm going to start there because I think people might need a little bit of a reminder. You said part of the job. Being on city council, being the mayor of Newport is very, very much a part-time job. I mean, there are people working at Ben & Jerry's who are making more than you do over the course of 12 months. How do you balance all of your responsibilities as a councilor or your responsibilities as the mayor? I see you at every single possible event while also trying to make a living with your real job.
Wait a second. This is a part-time job?
Hate to tell you.
The position of mayor in Newport pays $4,000 a year and traditionally has been a part-time focus. I made it a full-time focus for the first half of this previous year because I felt that there was a lot to do and a lot to learn. It was important to me to make sure that Newporters knew that I was focused sincerely on this job and doing as much as we could in the period that we have available to us. I'll be moving back to a hybrid structure, but that's how I've been tackling things so far. I think that my community presence and what we've been able to accomplish so far has reflected that.
Lots to get to. We might as well, we'll try to get to as many as we want. I appreciate everybody who has sent in questions. If we don't get to your question today, I'll email them to the mayor, get you an answer. We'll make sure we get it to you. Let's start with the talk of the town, if we call it that. Newport Elections Administrator, I'm going to kind of remind people here of some of the facts, is resigning. His last day is Friday. Caught up in a lot of pressure due to texts that he had sent, not as an employee of the city of Newport, but as an employee of a former job. Those texts came out allegedly. I believe it's allegedly. He was fired from that position, came and got a job with the city of Newport. There's a lot to be said. We just talked about your job. The city council job, the mayor job is not hiring and firing. That's the city manager. Where are we with this? Let's start there.
Well, the basic facts of it, right, are that particular employee has decided to resign. And so we are working hard to make sure that we can run a great election for the special election and that moving forward in the future, this is a situation that the city does not end up back in again. I'll be totally honest with you, and I can speak a little bit more freely about it now that the employee has made that employment decision. This is a really, really tough couple weeks, right? On the one hand, serving as mayor, which I think has many of the appearances and power that the bully pulpit comes with, in Newport lacks the ability to hire and fire people, right? And that is spelled out in city charter, and violation of that, any attempt to influence the hiring or firing of an employee is actually punishable by penalties including and up to prison. And so this is a very important line that the city administration takes very seriously. While it has been frustrating that has been used in this instance as a shield to prohibit any interference, that shield is also important when the sort of politics gets wielded by people who may have agendas that are not as pure. And so at the end of the day, part of what I was trying to say in the initial article that was published on this is that protection is in place actually to protect folks who are from marginalized communities as much as it is anything else. And so it's tough wrestling with that because it's something that is really, really frustrating. When I heard the news of those comments, I was absolutely outraged, right? I never could have imagined the actual depth of those comments and how hurtful they would be. And it was tough for me because it felt personal, right? I mean, I am a person of color. I have grown up being on the butt end of comments like those that we saw published. And hearing them again, even if they weren't directed at me, is hurtful. And it hurt a lot of people in our community. And to essentially be handcuffed by my position publicly was really, really frustrating. But I think it hurt more for an additional reason, right? Which is that this was not a comment that was just lobbed out the window of a car that was driving by. It wasn't some anonymous troll online that was putting it up just to stir up controversy. It was a comment that was made by somebody that this community knows really well. Right? This is somebody who served multiple times as this city's mayor, was elected to the council multiple times, was trusted by our state's highest courts, was trusted by many other public organizations. And it's also somebody that I got to know, quite frankly, through the process of campaigning. This is somebody that I met while knocking on doors, and who was kind enough to help support me throughout that campaign. And so to hear a comment like this coming from somebody that isn't just a stranger, but that you know, made it particularly hurtful and complicated. It was also further complicated by the fact that the way I handled this situation is the way that I've always handled situations where I've been confronted with racism in the past, which is to go down, and if I can, actually sit down and talk with the person to say, what happened here? How did this happen? And is this really who you are behind closed doors? And after having spoken with the individual and receiving a very sincere apology, but beyond that, also hearing about the work that he was doing, working with a DEI coach, going out to community events where I saw him to engage with marginalized communities, somebody who would acknowledge they're wrong. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking because at the end of the day, while these efforts are what I think we would hope anybody close to us that exercises a horrible lapse in judgment like this would do, that serving in a public position that deserves the public trust is not the right place to be doing that work. That is not the place where you get your second chance. And so it was frustrating for me to both, be confronted with the duality of that at the end of the day, and to feel it hit so personally.
Mayor, obviously we can't know. I'm gonna play devil's advocate and imagine that the city manager, while making this hiring decision, did not know about these texts. Maybe you know differently there. Maybe I don't. Well, do you know, actually? Do you know if the city manager knew about these texts or why he was let go from his previous position when hiring?
I don't. Here's what I do know, right? What I do know is that rumors about this sort of thing circulate all the time. And when you step back and you look at the context of the situation, it's clear that there's a bigger story, right, that went on behind this individual's departure. You have to remember at the time that this hire was made, we didn't have full knowledge as to what the nature of that departure was. And of course, it being a personnel matter, it was one that the courts were not commenting on. And so you're left with an incomplete picture. What I do know is that common sense to me dictated that this is somebody who comes into this position. Look, when you have a field of applicants and there's one that has a college degree and credential working, administering some of the largest organizations in the state, and they are applying for a rank and file position, you got to ask some questions as to what actually is going on here, right? So again, it's one of those situations where you have to use some common sense and apply it to the situation to dig a little bit deeper. I don't think that work was done here. And I think that was one of the shortcomings of many in the process that I think left many of us very frustrated.
So going back to not knowing it. So when it all came to fruition, it's going to be a two-part question to go off of a question I got from Betsy, who wrote in. Kind of what do you think should have happened when it came to light? And also, what can city council do as a governing body to change any kind of policy or ways we do things in the future to prevent it kind of being dragged out, maybe immediate action going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, again, the firewall that exists between the council and the hiring and firing or discipline of employees is an important one. The last thing you want is 7 individual people trying to manage individual employees within City Hall. But what I do think we need to do with absolute clarity is make it clear that hate has no quarter within our community. And we need to be looking at policies that we can enact that'll help strengthen that. A lot of this is cultural, right? We need to be making sure that conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion are not an individual training that we go through once a year or that happens and then we can kind of wipe our hands of it and we're done. But it has to be part of the ongoing dialogue that we are having on a regular basis within City Hall. For me, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. I think I'm somebody that, as you mentioned earlier, has made a point of showing up at almost every event that I can in our community to make sure that I really understand it, that I'm listening, and that particularly with those communities that traditionally have not gotten much attention, that have felt marginalized, that I'm making sure that they feel recognized and seen. The work that needs to be done, though, is that beyond just showing up and having those conversations, to be really intentional about bringing those conversations within City Hall in a focused and concentrated way. I'm going to be thinking of ways to do that. I'm obviously welcoming any suggestions on how best to do that, but I'll be making sure that conversations around DE&I are occurring on a regular basis in City Hall, and I'm at the forefront of leading those conversations.
Do you think, does this come in the, I think what people want, from what I've read, is, people want to know that there is a no tolerance. And I don't know whether to call that a policy, whether it's a resolution, an amendment, a charter change. How do you make it known that, hey, if we find out that somebody does this that works for the city of Newport, there is no tolerance, you're out?
Yeah, I think that you pointed to it, right? A good first step is a clear message from the council that is our policy. You have seen this council very consistently take action clarifying that we welcome all within this community. If you look at things like the passage of the Pride Resolution, if you look at our support of Juneteenth, all these things have passed unanimously from the council, and they've sent a clear message to the administration that equity and inclusion is our core value set, right? Our city motto is love conquers all for a reason. That is very much who we are as a community. And we've seen the administration start to reflect their understanding that this is where the council's priorities are. You saw our police department, for the first time in history, put out their annual report, which includes a breakout of information about crimes and the ethnicity of people that they are stopping, whether it's for things like traffic stops or other types of violations, to ensure that we at least can see if there's discrimination occurring within our community. You've seen an increased presence at community events of our multiple different city departments. Most recently, the city council appointed, at my nomination, the vice chair of the NAACP to the canvassing authority. So we are very focused on this as a city. And I can assure you that in the hiring of our next city manager, the ability of that individual to lead with absolute clarity on diversity, equity, inclusion, and to enforce a zero tolerance policy on hate will be at the top of the list of things that we're screening for.
With that vacancy, obviously it's a bad time. We have a special election coming up here. It's primary in September, election in November. How do we make sure that this is a smooth process? When does when will the hiring process begin? And I know that's a city manager thing, but what are you being told to give some security and make people feel that, hey, everything's going to be all right here in Newport?
Well, a few good things that are important to point out here. The first is that we have an excellent canvassing authority of people who are experienced in elections, are willing to roll up their sleeves to make sure that they can help. The second is we also have a very good city team. Right? In many communities, it is actually the clerk's office that leads this effort. Here, I know that our city's clerk's office is ready, willing, and able to step in if need be. But we're also reaching out to the Board of Elections to see what additional available resources might be available, whether it's from the Board of Elections itself or from neighboring communities in the 2nd Congressional District, to maybe help us out a little bit through this election if need be. Moving forward, looking at that position, I will be introducing a resolution asking the council to consider pulling our hiring practices in line with that which is used in many other communities and which is permitted under state law and which our charter also supports, which is allowing the canvassing authority to actually hire the canvassing clerk themselves. In this situation here, I think what we've seen is that the city administration decided that they were going to hire an elections administrator, the thought being that they would be able to more effectively help support the canvassing authority if that position was part of the rank and file of city government. I think what we learned here through this process with complete clarity is that with a position that is this important and public facing, it is essential that we have the added check and balance of an independent authority like the canvassing authority having a clear role in the hiring of that position.
I do want to make note that, and I don't expect you to know about every single vacancy in the world, but there is an alternate Republican vacancy on the canvassing authority right now. So if you are registered or want to register as a Republican, there is an alternate position on that authority available. And of course, this is my monthly plea that if you want to get involved in city government, there are tons of opportunities on boards, commissions. There's places for volunteer your time if you really want to get involved.
Yeah, we would welcome applicants for that position. The canvassing authority has traditionally been balanced between Republicans and Democrats, both recommended from the respective city committees. Newport not having an active Republican city committee, obviously we have to look to the general population for applicants, and would welcome having a Republican applicant who we could appoint to the authority to help administer these elections effectively, fairly, in a balanced fashion.
Mayor, if that wasn't enough of a vacancy, the city manager has just a couple months left here, retiring in September. That is Joe Nicholson. And I know that we have appointed an interim. Where are we in the hiring process? What do you think we'll have a brand new city manager here in Newport?
So I think what we're looking at from the departure date of Joe Nicholson, effectively, the second week of September, is probably a several-month process that we'll be going through for a national search to see if there's a candidate out there who would be a good fit for our city, and then going through a screening process. Ideally, this screening process will have a couple different steps, the first of which will be screening the candidates that do apply to ensure that they're actually qualified for the position itself. We're not looking to have people who this is their first rodeo, this is them figuring out if this might be a good career transition for them. No, we are looking for people who have a demonstrated and established track record leading communities like Newport through the types of challenges that we're trying to address right now through city government. That initial screening I envision being done by a third-party panel. This isn't something that I expect the council themselves to undertake. This is something that I'm hopeful that we will have individuals who are professionals in the field who will come forth and help us do that screening. This will be very similar to, I think, what we saw in the screening process for applicants to the police department, where you had 3 individuals, in that instance, a former state trooper, another city manager, and a police chief, screening the initial applicants to narrow it down to a field that then the leadership within the city could select from to ensure that we had a chief that was qualified from a third party perspective, from industry experts who know what it takes to get these jobs done.
And just a reminder, the actual hiring process will come by city council vote.
That's correct. At the end of the day, the ultimate city manager is selected by a majority vote of the Newport City Council. It is probably the most important job that this council has. I know that the entirety of the council is taking this very seriously. Our first order of business was making sure that we had an acting manager to ensure continuity of operations for the city. We've done that with the selection of Laura, who comes to us having worked within the city for a number of years, but also having experience in jurisdictions across the U.S. And so we're lucky to have her at the helm for this period of time and look forward to the pool of applicants that we receive for that position.
Tomorrow's a big day. 6:30 tomorrow night. There is a regular council meeting, but before that, you're going to get dirty and talk dirt with Rhode Island DEM, and we are talking about the soil over at Rogers High School. And there has been so much information going back and forth on this. There's been resolutions. What are we going to do to get an outcome here? Obviously, everybody, I think, can agree, and hopefully they would all agree that we do want it to be a safe place, and we do want to make sure that the soil is safe. And I'm sure if the experts can come in and say, hey, it's safe, hey, it's not safe, it would put everybody at ease. What are you hoping for out of tomorrow night's workshop?
Well, I want to clarify 2 things, just because we get great participation in our meetings. Tomorrow is just a special council meeting. Our next regular scheduled council meeting will actually be next Wednesday at 6:30. That's okay. But this was an issue that was so important that we felt that we needed a special meeting to work through it. We have, as individual councilors and meeting as a whole recently on this resolution that David Carlin put forth, councilor from the 3rd Ward, where this pile is, have been trying to understand exactly what is going on with this dirt pile out at Rogers High School. It is, for those who have not walked out there, a substantial pile of dirt. It is several stories high. It is much larger than I think anybody expected, nor what is the norm within the construction of school buildings. And so we're really trying to understand what's in that pile. And is it something that we need to be concerned with? And what is the appropriate way for us to be dealing with that soil in order to ensure that we maintain public health and safety? The best way for us to do that is to hear directly from the scientists to actually understand what we should be doing. We had heard extensively in the initial hearing on the pile itself from members of the community and members from the school building committee. All of which readily admitted that they are not scientists, that they are doing the best they can with the information that they have available. But with something this serious that potentially impacts public health, I wanted to make sure, and the rest of the council wanted to make sure, that we actually heard from the best experts that we could get access to. We're lucky to have the Rhode Island DEM, Department of Environmental Management, coming down to provide that insight. And I'm hopeful that coming out of that meeting, we can understand just how concerned we should be about what's in that pile of dirt, what else we need to do to ascertain what is in that pile of dirt, and potential pathways forward to resolving this issue so that it is not something that in any way threatens the public health of residents.
Mayor, I'm not sure if you've had any conversations since the resolution was introduced a couple weeks ago, but what are your concerns about that pile? I'm not sure if you've had any opportunities to speak to any experts in between the meeting and tomorrow's special meeting, but are you concerned about the pile?
I'll tell you what I'm concerned about. As an attorney, I was provided with a series of documents that were received by a resident through a public information request. That series of documents outlined how a pile of dirt relative to a school construction project ended up being the responsibility of the city of Newport. That being the documentation I received was a series of formal correspondence between the contractors working on the site, the environmental testing company responsible for testing that soil, and Rhode Island DEM, essentially passing liability for any potential impacts on public health arising from that pile of soil from the school committee itself, the school building committee, over to the city of Newport. The only problem is that there was nobody actually from the city of Newport CC'd on those correspondence. And so this now being a pile that literally lies within the jurisdiction of the city council, that's why we're digging in and taking it so seriously. And so we normally would not be arbitrarily wandering into the realm of the school department, but here it's been made clear to us that we have to, because at the end of the day, this liability rests with us, and we're rolling up our sleeves to make sure that we address whatever the problem may end up being.
There's the other camp, and I just want to put it out there because I have not looked to see if this is an actual fact, but I'll put it out there because I'm sure you've heard of it as well, that if we were in Massachusetts, none of this would necessarily matter. The threshold of being considered contaminated in Rhode Island is so much lower than that it is in Massachusetts. And some people are saying it's time for Rhode Island to raise that level of contamination of what would be considered contamination.
Well, first of all, we all live in Rhode Island. We chose to live here, right? And so we are tasked not with operating within an environment that we might prefer to operate within, but within the environment, the laws that are structured within our state. And so I'm not going to spend too much time chasing what other states may or may not be permitting. I'm sure we could find other states that would be fine with any level of toxin on certain sites, right? But that's not where we live, and that's not the environment that we're operating under. Furthermore, I am not going to, I'm not going to wave off the presence of any level of toxin in our soil without hearing first from a scientist and an expert. That's what we're looking to do here, is to let the science guide us on this ultimate decision and on what to do next.
We'll stay at Rogers for a minute here. Peter wrote in and we're just sharing that he grows increasingly anxious about the progress of the new Rogers. He says problems continue to pop up, don't seem to get resolved. The latest being the routing and excavation lines for sewer and gas that may force abandonment of a previous decision. No one seems to know costs, whether the project is over or under the budget. As the chairman of the board of directors of this enterprise, are you confident the school building committee can complete the project on time and within budget? If not, maybe it's time for new leadership or at least an independent assessment of the project. Rogers High School in a whole, how are you confident? Obviously, there is the cost associated with soil. There's a ongoing belief or understanding that Rogers is going to cost more than what we initially thought it was. Where are you in the process with the school building committee and everything you're hearing?
I'm frustrated. I think the entirety of the council is frustrated right now. It feels like whenever we ask for some level of certainty as to where we sit within this process, what we're anticipating the ultimate cost overruns are going to be on this project, that we can't seem to get a clear answer. I think what we probably need to do next is set up a workshop with the school committee where we can hash out exactly where we are as far as they can disclose. Because thus far, every time we've asked these questions, we've been told we can't disclose that to you. It's really frustrating to be at the top of an enterprise where you can't get those answers from people. And if we don't get those answers, ultimately we will be taking steps to realign this to be a group where we're able to get this project completed. we are looking at, without a doubt, overruns on this project that are due to a variety of factors, part of which I believe is the actual effective management of this project. Project management is a unique skill set, and it takes people who have experience in this space to actually be able to effectively guide and get this job done. Thus far, I haven't received any level of affirming confidence that that's actually what we have here at hand. And so we're watching this carefully. We're trying to be patient but persistent in moving towards what it is that we need to put in place to get this project done. The bigger concern I have, though, is that a project like this takes an enormous amount of bandwidth, regardless of who is at the helm. And right now we have a dual challenge, that being that we need to make substantial improvements in the quality of education we have in our public schools, and that the time and bandwidth of our school committee is very badly needed helping to guide that work. And I worry that with this project consuming so much of it, that we're not giving enough time to thinking about the actual academic strategy that we have within the ultimate classrooms that are going to be available to students to ensure that our students are getting the opportunities they need to succeed.
Mayor, what's a sign or a time that you believe that City Council might have to step in? Is there a point in time? Is it this fall? Is it if something doesn't happen? Is it the soil? When do you think you, the council, obviously, if I don't say this enough, I haven't said it this, you are one person on City Council. You do not speak for all of the council, and you still need 6 other votes. But when would be a time to step in and say, hey, we need to get our hands around this a little bit more?
Yeah, our first step, right, is going to be methodically going through where it is that we stand right now on the school construction project. We just got through the budget process itself, which consumed an enormous amount of our bandwidth. It's an exercise we revisit once a year, but we really functionally do once every 2 years. But I think once we get through that initial next meeting, we'll have a clear line of sight as to where we stand relative to potentially having to step in and take additional action to help support making sure this project gets done. The challenge that we face, the I guess, answer we need to sort out from a timing perspective is how we're going to pay for this. Right? We know that there's going to be a cost overrun. We've seen this project getting whittled back from what voters originally approved. I think that it's widely accepted right now that this project is going to take a substantial amount of additional money to get done. But if we know that it needs more money, we're going to have to go out and find those resources one way or another. And the longer we wait to make that determination, the harder it's going to get for us to close that financial gap in a way that allows us to complete this project in a timely manner and get the certifications we need from the state to start receiving the reimbursement from the state on this project. And so this is not something that is going to drag out through the beginning of next year. It's a decision that we're going to be focused on, understanding what the best pathway forward is, and then making that decision as decisively as we can as a body and moving forward from it.
The superintendent, over her last 2 visits with us here for interviews, has mentioned there is a possibility that we may have to go to a bond, a special bond item, a special election, or maybe next November when the next election is bonds. You need to come up with money somewhere. Do you see that as possibly going to the voters for a bond item?
I think it just depends on the scale of the project and the other available resources to it. The city right now is actually in a pretty good position, as is the school, with regards to its reserves. And so my first preference is that we not leverage up in the market any more than we need to, and first look at the resources that we have available to us. But secondarily, yes, if we have to go forth with a bond, right, and we can look at that bond and determine that it is in line with appropriate debt metrics for our community, I do think asking the voters whether or not they feel comfortable with that additional monies is a responsible question. But before we ask them that, we owe them an answer, which is, how are we going to make sure that this project actually gets done this time? They've been asked to do this once. They trusted us, and ultimately the school building committee was not able to deliver on that. We now need to refocus on how we hone that message to make sure that we provide the safeguards that we need to make sure this project actually gets done within the parameters and the monies that are available if we go forth and ask for additional funds.
Mayor, this is a good question. This comes in from Jennifer Gee. Have you been attending the school building committee meetings? And I'm going to add something to that, Jennifer, if it's allowed. Who can attend the meetings? If people want to learn more, it's got to be open to the public. Have you attended any of the meetings? Are you encouraging people to go to the meetings?
I have, and I would. I think that you are looking at, first of all, the school committee is a department that consumes a substantial portion, the largest portion of our city's budget, and that is under their control. So I think more residents should be paying attention to what's going on in education in this community, regardless of whether or not they have kids in school, because this is where government spends much of its available resources. The second is that the school building committee is tackling a project that is one of the largest in the city's recent history. At the end of the day, it will be a resource that hopefully is a huge asset to this community. But it's important that we get that right. It is available and open to everybody in the public. I occasionally attend these meetings, and the ones that I can't make, I watch virtually. I absolutely would encourage more citizen engagement around the school building process. I think it's very helpful to understand what's going on. I will give them credit that to the extent that they have information, thus far this year, they've been sharing that information, and those meetings are their outlet for doing that. So for those who want to learn more, I encourage you to go to those meetings and participate.
Mayor, I just want to be respectful of your time. We are at 30 minutes. You have a couple more minutes to just bang out a couple more questions?
Certainly.
Okay. Coggeshall School, big topic of conversation at last week's city council meeting. Give me the recap that people should know what happened. There has been a lot said on social media, the next doors and the Facebooks of the world. Why are people upset? Why shouldn't they be upset?
Well, I'll say this first. This is the first opening we have in what will be a very long public conversation around what ultimately happens with that school. Because you can't have an entire community negotiating with 4 different developers at once, we wanted to select one developer that we thought would be well situated to help ultimately guide this property back into a productive use for the community. That use that this council agreed to and supported with the passage of an original resolution back in February, reopening this process for a second time, was to look at providing housing through that, specifically that housing which was needed most in Newport, which is workforce housing. The tricky part here, right, is that what people consider workforce housing varies drastically. What the experts say workforce housing is, what the guidance is that we receive as to where Newport has the largest housing gap is within what's defined legally as workforce housing. This is 80% to 100% of the area median income individuals paying a third of their income in towards their living expenses. So what does that mean in layman's terms? That is an individual making between $65,000 and $98,000 a year. And those are rents that are between $1,600 and $2,800 per year on the high end. That's a pretty big range. That's a pretty big range. All of the proposals that we received came within the lower end of that range. Ultimately, we moved forward with one particular proposer because we felt it was the individual that put forth the clearest vision on how we provide workforce housing. They put forth the highest number of units of workforce housing, that being 32 units. They put forth the clear intent and willingness to engage in a conversation with the community about what other amenities and benefits they wanted. And they're also a developer that has a proven track record of being able to actually complete these projects. The other proposals that came in had contingencies around financing. This was the one that came through that really had clarity that not only that they were able to get this job done in a timely fashion, but that they were going to deliver the highest number of units that were within that workforce zone possible.
Where do you see the next project? Or do you have any ideas or goals or dreams of where we can put more housing?
Housing should not be concentrated in one particular neighborhood or area. It's something that we need throughout the entire city. But I will tell you that where I believe there to be the biggest opportunity to build housing are in areas that are immediately around transit and areas within our business district. When you look at other communities and how they've effectively built housing, when you look at what we're doing here in Newport, 90% of our city is built out, right? So there isn't a lot of land available for more single-story traditional single-family homes. What we need to be doing is thinking about how we build upward. I look out across the street right now and I see a bunch of single-level commercial and retail spaces. In many other cities with any reasonable level of density, what you would see there, and what you saw there historically in Newport, were 2 and 3 stories where above these shops people were actually living, right? That adds to the vibrancy of a community year round. It cuts back on the commutes that people need to go to work, reducing the amount of traffic that we have in our community, and it makes for a more vibrant space to live in. I think the future of housing in Newport are looking at spaces that we can, whether it's single-story retail, whether it's parking lots that we see, and thinking about how we build above those spaces to take advantage of the airspace that we have in a way that is still that still comports with the community character that we have of being a city that is largely structures under 3 stories.
One spot that discussed housing or apartments of some sort is the Newport Grand property. I know it is private property, but it is a large piece of property that you see as soon as you come into Newport. Just wondering if you have heard any updates on what the developers there are planning to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I reach out and talk with the developers up there as frequently as is appropriate because I want to make sure that we get a project started up there. Prior council put a moratorium on development up there. That is why that property sat there languishing. I've made it clear that if that developer can come forward with a proposal that is mixed use, that it's something that this council will consider and that the city would welcome the opportunity to discuss. Without having the totality of it in front of us, it's hard to say yes or no, but I can tell you that from the discussions I've had with them, they understand that housing is at the core of what we need to produce in that ultimate site. But it has to be mixed use, right? We can't look at the north end as a place where we warehouse people and just ship them in. This has to be a secondary extension of our community northward. And so within that space, we also need to be thinking about how we create high-paying jobs that diversify our economy, how we create additional amenities that make sure that it has a neighborhood feel. I have just introduced a resolution that will take us on our first step towards how we start addressing what's happening in the north end, which is actually look at how we would go about getting control of the properties that are going to be freed up through the realignment of the bridge, how we go about financing the acquisition of those properties, but also making the infrastructure and remediation improvements we need to make in order to realize the vision of the North End urban plan, and in order to be doing it in a way that comports with the North End equitable development strategy that was put forth a couple of years ago. We've spent a lot of time as a community thinking about the big vision, right? What would we ultimately like to see there? But we haven't thought about steps 1 through 4, which is actually how do we put ourselves in a position to realize that? It's kind of like picking out the paint color for your front door before you've even figured out what house you're going to be able to buy and how you're going to be able to afford it. We need to do those steps first. That's going to require a lot of technical assistance and help. In the city of Providence, they had a special commission set up, staffed by 6 people full-time, looking just at this issue. In Newport right now, our entire planning department is 3 people. We put in a couple ads to staff, but it's going to take a little while for us to get those people on board. So my hope is that we can tap some of the great expertise that exists within our community, people who have worked on projects like this around the state in places like Quonset, East Providence, the 195 Commission, and to draw on that talent on a basis right now for free to help guide us on this process and to get ready to ensure that when DOT does ultimately open up the doors and say, what's your plan here and what's it going to take to transfer that property over to you, that we're ready with the best expertise and advice we can to execute.
The answer is navy door with a pineapple knocker, if anybody's wondering, and white Christmas lights when the time comes, or holiday lights. Just wondering quickly, how do you get or how do you incentivize people to build up? For example, we're just going to use Broadway. There's no plan. But how do you get people to do you have to give them credits? How do you get the business owners or the property owners to say it's going to be worth it to go up a second story?
Zoning is at the key of these types of decisions. And we have asked our planning staff as part of one of the resolutions we passed earlier this year to put forth a series of zoning recommendation changes that they think would help us on this housing front, but to also undertake a more comprehensive review of our city's zoning code to modernize it. It is no secret from anybody that has ever gone to make any sort of a change to their property that the majority of the city structures are non-conforming. And to have a zoning code that doesn't fit them really jams up the zoning and planning process substantially. And it deprives us of the opportunity to look at projects like these and think about innovative ways to actually make them work. I can tell you one key is density, right? We need to be considering where and when we're enforcing certain density limitations and the extent to which things like parking requirements are appropriate. In neighborhoods, this makes sense, right? It makes sense that in a neighborhood, you don't want an excessive level of density that then drives a high need for parking, flushing people out on the streets and adding to the congestion. But when you get into downtown areas, when you get into areas that are adjacent to transit, when you are dealing with populations that are working in the immediate areas that they're living in, the necessity of having one parking space per bedroom starts to look a little bit questionable. If you go into any other city of a decent size, even the city of Providence, for example, those parking requirements are things that you don't see. There's no expectation that you have a car. And we're also now dealing with a generation of people who quite frankly, are less tied to the automobile. This isn't for everyone. That's okay. But for a lot of people, that is the new structure of living. And so requiring that the cost burden of an additional parking space is something that's included with every single house, with every single bedroom, is the type of thing that we need to get away from if we're going to be able to incentivize the type of vertical development that will make this city more robust and help us address the housing challenges that we have.
For almost 9 years, my only vehicle was a moped. So I just want to point it out. In Newport, you can go to a lot of places. Newport accepts mopeds and bikes, and a lot of people are commuting that way. I want to quickly wrap this up. Mike writes in, and this might be more of an awareness, but it can take us all around the Rotary here. Ongoing flooding issues at Prescott Hall. This past Sunday, the bridge project once again overloaded our storm system, turning the storm drains in our yards, small geysers, and flooding our property, garage storage once again. What are they doing to rectify this problem? I'll also add to Mike's question, who should people be contacting when things like this happen to make sure somebody knows about it?
Yeah, reach out to the city itself, right? Feel free to send me an email. Stormwater is one of the areas that I worked in wastewater for most of my career. When I talk about this technical advisory group for the North End, part of why it's so important that we have technical experts at hand that can help us on this is that in order to develop that land, what we first need to do is mitigate stormwater. The stormwater challenges right now that come off of those surrounding properties are overwhelming our residents in areas that already were low-lying and had historically struggled with water issues, and it has now created a complete crisis. And so the need to develop infrastructure in this space to address that stormwater challenge is of the utmost importance, and it's one of the things that needs to happen before we start thinking about how we develop out the North End. The price tag on that project is not small. We are looking at likely $50 million of stormwater infrastructure to help address the challenges that the neighborhood and the areas immediately surrounding it are facing from stormwater right now. We have the initial studies that have been done from Prescott Hall on that. We're going to continue to press to see what additional resources we can get, so that as soon as we do have control and access over that site, we're able to do that. In addition, I'll tell you this, the extent I've had conversations with Carpinado about their property, I've been very clear that one of the key community benefits that we will be needing is stormwater mitigation. That is one of the biggest challenges that this area is facing. It's one of the biggest needs that we have. If we can help these residents get their heads above water, I think ultimately at the end of the day, that'll be a job well done.
How are you feeling about the rest of the Pell Bridge ramps project? Are we on schedule? Are we on time? Any concerns? Anything people should know?
That project is cruising along, right? It is obviously frustrating living in the middle of construction zone. I actually abut part of that construction zone. So for those who have felt the constant wear and tear of heavy machinery and noise and dust, I've been living the same experience that you have. That being said, this is one of just a few sites within the entire state that the Rhode Island DOT works on year-round. They are dedicated to getting this project done on time. I think when you started to see some of the big developments that have happened recently, like taking down that bridge to nowhere, connecting JT Connell Highway, it's really opened up people's eyes to how much this project is going to change our community, hopefully for the better.
What else has City Council been working on anything this summer? I don't know why I even asked, but
we've been cruising along, right? And by the way, that pace is not slowing down. This council has an enormous amount of energy to tackle a huge range of issues. They have been wonderful about participating and supporting the many different areas that I've been leading them in. And while we all don't get along and agree on every single issue, while there's certainly been a lot of lively debates, what you do have is a group of people who have been willing to roll up their sleeves to talk about the issues on their merits and to reach the best possible conclusions that we can. And so we'll keep going at the pace we've been going, and I'm confident that that is what it's going to take to keep moving Newport in the direction it needs to.
I'll make sure we get a conversation on the schedule for early August, but was there anything else that you wanted to bring up today that we did not get to?
Yeah, Ryan. 11th Hour Racing won the entire ocean race.
Yes, they did.
We are going to be having a killer celebration on this front. Please stay tuned for additional information as it comes out. But this is awesome, right? This is unprecedented. An American team has never won that race. And specifically, that team isn't just American, but they are from Newport. They are based here. I could not be more excited about that victory. It is reaffirming the fact that we are the capital of sailing. And I could not be more excited to welcome them home and celebrate their victory very shortly.
Excellent. I will make a note. I attended a NEVA, National Institute of Independent Venues Association meeting in Washington, D.C., and all of our friends from Newport Festivals Foundation were present, as well as Christian McBride, who is the artistic director for Newport Jazz. To be in a room of 1,000 people and seeing how Newport interacts with the festivals and how they work together in a small city, and all of the pride that and all of the kudos that people were sharing about what's happening in Newport around the festivals, those festivals as well. Another great event at Fort Adams was really fun to see.
I mean, the number of events that we have here is incredible. On any given weekend, there are 2 or 3 major events happening in the city. Right now, we are in the middle of the Tennis Hall of Fame Championships, an event that draws thousands of people and is broadcast across the country. And so there's always something exciting to do in Newport. Our team here at the city does a great job coordinating as best they can. Our residents are amazing at being patient with this huge influx of visitors. I still think this is one of the most welcoming communities in America, and our ability to pull off these events is directly related to the attitude that we tackle them with, and what a wonderful place this is.
That's a good place to wrap up. And if people want to attend the conversation on Rogers High School Dirt, that is taking place tomorrow at City Hall. And then the following week, the regular council will be taking place on Wednesday. So, all right, Mayor. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and we will get something up for August. We'll see you again in August.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Ryan.
All right. That is Mayor Tsai. We thank the mayor for taking extra time with us today. 47 minutes. There is just so much going on right now, and we appreciate him taking the time. I believe I got to most of the questions. If there are any questions left over or comments, I'll make sure the mayor and city staff get those. Thanks for watching. If you missed any portion of this, want to watch it again, want to share it, all available on whatsupnuke.com. Thanks.